Hello, so this is just overview for tomorrow, December 2nd at 6 p.m., the City Council meeting. As I said, I'm going to be trying to do this before and after the meetings. So a very quick rundown of the agenda items, and then I will break several of them down further. They will do their normal recognitions, proclamations, what's good in Greeley. There'll be community input. My understanding is there are going to be quite a few people in attendance because of one of the things that will be voted on related to the West Greeley project, but we'll get there in a second. The consent agenda items, as we talked about, consent agenda are generally considered the business as usual, shouldn't need to discuss. However, there have been some times where there have been some things that seem to be snuck in there. So I just wanted to be able to explain quickly what's under the consent agenda this time. The first one is to go ahead and vote to adopt the mill rate for the Downtown Development Authority as well as their budget. There are two different resolutions to forgive loans for affordable housing developments. A resolution to enter into a settlement agreement with a resident who was suing a police officer and the city following an auto accident. A resolution to enter into a contract with the company that is going to be doing the repairs or continuing the repairs on the Bellevue water treatment plant. And then there will be a first reading of an ordinance that is going to amend the Greeley Development Code. So I'll break that down further. Ultimately, its hope is to make the review process fast-tracked for affordable housing. Then there will be a first reading of ordinance reauthorizing the committees and boards that we reviewed from last meeting that had the triennial reviews, basically just saying, yep, we're going to continue them on for the next 3 years. And then finally, a first reading of the ordinance to designate the City Hall building, the round building at 1010th Street, as on the historic register. Following the consent agenda items, there are two things that will depend on which route the City Council decides to go. So the first one is a resolution for a special election. This would be what the petition was done for. There were sufficient signatures, and so the City Council can either vote to go to a special election, which would occur on February 24th, in which case it would look at the ordinance for the zoning. People of Greeley would finally get a vote. Or instead, the City Council can choose to instead repeal the zoning ordinance themselves. I will break that down a little further here in just a moment. The last two items are an overview of the city manager search. The director of HR is just going to present what that looks like, what stages they go through, the different phases. And then they will ask to adjourn to an executive session to meet with the acting city manager, Brian McBroom, to talk about performance expectations and to set goals. So going back in a bit more detail, so on the setting the mills for the DDA, the Downtown Development Authority, they are actually just continuing the same mill rate that they've had since 2008 that occurred at the special election, which is the maximum of 5 mills. For those of you who don't know what the mills are, essentially it is an additional tax on property taxes. It says for every $1,000 spent, however many mills there are, is how many additional dollars will be collected. So in this case, it'll be $5. Same thing it's been since 2008, but they're going to continue that. The budget is pretty standard. It looks about the same as it did last year. Okay, then getting into the loan forgiveness. So there were two different ones. One resolution for the Community Development Home Investment Partnership Program loans to High Plains. This was in a loan from 2017 for Stagecoach Gardens and in 2022 for La Casa Rosa Senior Apartments. And then another resolution to forgive a loan to the Housing Authority for Lincoln Square Apartments. So just so you know, as they're putting this in consent agenda, as I did research, it looks like it's best practice by HUD, because this wasn't actually general funds that were given for these loans. It was HUD entitlement funds from the state, or from federal. And so what they do with that is kind of in a good faith, like it's a loan, but if the projects continue with affordable housing, continue to meet the benchmarks that they're supposed to, that these can be turned into what mirrors more of like a grant rather than a loan in order to allow them to continue. And so they'll be voting to agree that all 3 of these housing developments have continued to offer affordable housing, they meet the requirements, and having it continue as a loan would actually put undue pressure on them to continue to be able to be affordable, because that's additional money that's going to have to go out to pay the loan that they really need in order to do repairs, upkeep, all of that. So when I looked it up, pretty standard to turn those loans into more of like a grant and decide to forgive that. The settlement agreement, there was a resident, Tania Perez, who was involved in an auto accident and found to be at fault. However, it said that the officer who had done it that had made the claims made erroneous statements of fact, and so the prosecutors actually dismissed the charges against Ms. Perez, and so she in turn is filing a lawsuit for damages, claiming that that officer violated her constitutional rights. It is a settlement of $295,000. The city of Greeley was encouraged, recommended by outside consultants or lawyers to accept this as a settlement and save the money that it would take to go to litigation. So that's in the consent agenda. The Bellevue Water Treatment Company, the only thing really of interest in here is to know that this contract was non-competitive, so they didn't really take it to bids because they said it is unique or specialized nature. Basically what it is the same company, Engineering Analytics Inc., has already been dealing with the Bellevue Water Treatment Plant, and so they're saying they're already familiar with the project. It's most cost effective for them to continue. Then on the first reading for the ordinance for text amendment to Greeley Development Code. So as I said, this is intended to change language to make the review process for affordable housing easier. This is based on requirements from Prop 123 that we get affordable housing funds from the state for. The plan